Welcome to this little hands-on tutorial on the MC-202 mod for the Roland MC-202 synthesizer. The MC-202 mod replaces the original CPU and display and brings a lot of additional features. For example, MIDI input and output while retaining the original DIN-Sync connection, a step sequencer with 64 steps per pattern, 32 patterns in total, and the patterns can change into a song. You can edit one pattern while another one is playing. It adds an arpeggiator with a lot of direction modes, multiple octaves, and even an Euklidian mode. You get 3 independent channels. So channel 1 is the internal synthesizer. You get an additional channel which you can use to control external synthesizers, either via CV gate or via MIDI. And you get a third channel that can output lo-fi drum samples. We have several additional envelopes for the filter and for the pulse width, as well as LFOs, and it also adds noise as an additional source for the mixer. When you start your 202, you are in normal mode. Normal mode is the mode where you can just play normally on the keyboard. There are a couple of things you can adjust. You can set the portamento to auto mode, as I have now. You can change that by pressing Shift and Porta. Now Porta is always off. And now portamento is always on. You can also define whether the synthesizer re-triggers when playing legato or not. So now re-trigger is off, and you can hear it's not re-triggering the envelope. But I can turn that on. And now it re-triggers the envelope each time I play. Below the current note there are 4 modifiers. And we can add modifiers to a note to enhance the sound. We have accent, which plays a louder note. We have filter accent, which opens the filter. You can combine those, of course. Then we have portamento. You can manually trigger the portamento at any time. And last but not least, there's the noise waveform, which we can trigger per note. You can actually adjust the volume and the decay of that noise in the menu. More about that later. Using these 3 buttons, you can transpose the internal keyboard, just like in the original. Let's say we want to create a pattern for the sequencer. We just press Edit. And while it's pressed, we could now select which pattern to record into. But for now, I leave it at pattern F1, which is this one here. And once I release the Edit button, I'm into the pattern editor. Here I can just enter the notes as I like, and it will add them to the pattern. You can also add the modifiers right now before entering the note. So for example, I could say the next note should have accent and noise. And when I enter the note, you can already hear that it has these modifiers. Using the back and forward buttons, I can now go back and forward in my sequence, change notes, or add modifiers at any time. I wanted to have 16 notes, but I've entered 17. No problem, we can always delete one step. As a matter of fact, we can delete steps in the sequence wherever we like. We can also copy a note and paste it. Not only at the end, but we can paste it in the middle of the pattern. We can also insert a new note into the pattern and then program it here. So, we now have a 16 steps pattern. Let's play it. We just press play and release it, and oh, it's not playing. This is because our master clock is not running. Theoretically, you can clock the MC-202 via DIN-sync, via the internal clock, or via MIDI, or as a matter of fact, via a trigger input of the tape interface. For now, we're using the internal clock, but I have to start it. And you can right away, you can hear the pattern is playing. If I press play again, it stops. The master clock is still running, and I could start it again. Note that it will always start in sync with the master clock. So it waits and then it starts on the one. While a pattern is playing, I can actually live add the modifiers here. So for example, if I want to have more accented steps, or filter accent, and I add a little bit of noise, or portamento, I can do that live. Using Shift and these buttons here, we can change the direction the sequencer is playing. We can go backwards, we can go ping pong, up, down. There's a random mode, which plays the notes completely randomly. And finally, there are two special random modes that don't play the notes completely randomly, but in a nice rhythmical way. While our pattern is playing, we can always go into the editor and edit certain notes, add modifiers, and so on. Let's copy our pattern to another pattern. Just press Shift and copy, and we select the pattern we want to copy, which is F1. Now we press Shift and paste that into multiple other patterns. I can now go to the editor and select this pattern here. This is not the one that's currently playing, and I can go in here and edit it a little bit. Back in Play View, we can now switch to the other pattern immediately. It will always stay in sync this way. If you want to program a little song, chain the patterns together, we can just do so by pressing play, hold it, and now press the patterns we want to add to that song. I'm pressing F1 2 times, or 3 times for good measure, and then I press G1, and this is now my song, 3 times F1, 1 time G1. Once I release play, it will then start the new song in sync. The song we just programmed can also be edited via the song editor. Press Shift and Song. And now, very similar to the pattern editor we saw before, we can now go in here and edit the song. We can see pattern F1, 1, 1 and then G1. And we can modify that. We could, for example, go in here and enter G1 here. We can also transpose a sequence. Just press Shift and transpose 0 is here on this key, and we can go up or down. We can also modify the note length by using Shift and these length keys here. Currently all the notes have length number 4, but we can change that to length 3 or 2 or 1. And we can also insert rests. Let's play that. Let's have a look at the arpeggiator. We enter the arpeggiator by pressing Shift and Arp, and now we are in the arpeggiator view. We can see the last played note, the arpeggiator direction. We can see the status of hold, how many octaves we are arpeggiating, and the chemistry pattern. If we now press some keys, you can hear the arpeggiator playing. By pressing Shift and Hold, the currently pressed notes are held. Using the forward and backward keys, we can now change how many octaves are arpeggiated. We can change the direction, forward, backward, ping pong, up down, and random. There's also one special direction, which is called the order direction. Here, notes are played in the order I enter it into the keyboard. I can actually enter a note multiple times, which means it's like a little mini sequencer. There's also order reverse called retro, which reverses the order of the pressed keys. Let's go forward again. Now, an interesting feature of the arpeggiator is the chemistry. Here, the modifiers, note lengths and breaks of an existing pattern can be applied to the arpeggiator. We just press the chemistry pattern button here and select from which pattern we want to use the chemistry from. We use our pattern G1, and right away you can hear the accents, note lengths and breaks of that pattern being applied to the arpeggiator. There's also an Euklidian mode built into the arpeggiator, and we can switch between the normal arpeggiator and the Euklidian arpeggiator at any time. Let's just play a little thing here, and using this button here we can switch into the Euklidian mode. I will not explain it in detail, there's a user manual for that, but let's just say it's in there and you can change a lot of parameters as well. Let's have a look at the different channels. Channel 1 controls the internal synthesizer, but can also be used to control external synthesizers via MIDI or via the CV gate output. Pressing the channel button brings us to channel 2. Here I connected an external synthesizer via MIDI, but we could also connect one via CV gate. We can play here normally, but we could also use the arpeggiator here and so on. Channel 3 can be configured to be the drum channel. We can upload samples via MIDI sysx, and it outputs the drum sounds via the tape output here. The note modifiers work a little bit differently with the drums. We have accent, we have reverse, half speed, double speed, and of course we can combine those as well. And let's program a little drum sequence here. And let's play it. We can also use the live modifiers, of course. And I really like to use the random forward function for the drums. All the three channels work completely independently. We could, for example, play a sequence on channel 1, use an arpeggiator on channel 2, and play some drums on channel 3. Let's have a look at the configuration menu. We enter the configuration menu by pressing Shift and Enter, and here you have a selection of different sub-menus. You can navigate with the forward-backward keys, enter a sub-menu with Enter, or go back with the tab here. Let's have a look at the clock menu first. Here you can select the clock source. Currently it's set to internal clock, but we also have desync, MIDI, or trigger by using the tape input here as a trigger input. For each of the three channels we can set the clock dividers independently. So for example, channel 1 is set to 16th notes, channel 2 is set to quarter notes, and channel 3 again is set to 16th. We can just change that. There are a lot of choices here. And you can even change the clock dividers while the sequence is playing. It will always be in sync. Next, let's have a look at the mod and sound menu. Here we can find accents, envelopes, LFOs, and noise settings. First, let's have a look at the filter accent. I programmed a little sequence with one step with the filter accent and one without, so we can hear the difference. I can adjust the amount, the attack, and decay of the accent. Attack and decay go from 1 millisecond all the way up to 10 seconds. Next, let's have a look at the additional filter ADSR. In order for us to hear it properly, I set the envelope amount of the filter to 0, but of course you can use the additional envelope and the normal envelope simultaneously. We can set the amount of the envelope, delay, attack, decay, and release. And again, all the way from 1 millisecond up to 10 seconds is possible. There's also an invert mode. And a looping mode. We also have a filter LFO. We can adjust the amount here. The LFO waveform, triangular, sawtooth, reversed sawtooth, rectangular, and sample and hold style. We can also change the frequency from a period of 20 seconds all the way up to 1 kilohertz. And these audio frequency modulations allow you to do crazy filter modulation sounds. There's also an LFO delay. Not only can the LFO be used in free running mode, where you can adjust the frequency, we can also use it in synced mode. Here it is synced to the clock that's currently selected, and we can adjust the clock divider. So I'm dialing the tempo clock, and you can see that the LFO frequency is changing. I think the best way to show it to you is to start at a sequence, one of those that we have programmed before, and then we can listen to the synced LFO. Now it's set to 1 beat. We can make it a bit faster. Quarter notes, 16th notes, but there are a lot of choices, of course. This is especially interesting with the sample and hold style LFO. There's also an ADSR and an LFO for the pulse width. Let's use the square wave as a source for the mixer. We set the pulse width to manual, just so we can hear it better, but of course you can use it in combination with all these settings as well. Let's set the amount to something and listen to the pulse width changing. Maybe adjust the attack a little bit. Let's add a bit of LFO. A bit faster. By the way, all these settings can also be controlled with a MIDI controller. Finally, let's have a look at our noise settings. In order to hear that better, I turn off all the mixer sources, but of course you can use them simultaneously with the noise. I programmed a little sequence that has one step with noise and one without noise, so we can hear it better. We can adjust the noise amount. We can adjust the noise quality. The attack. Again, all the way from 1 millisecond to 10 seconds. And decay. The next submenu I would like to show you is the set submenu. A set contains all the sequencer data, the arpeggiator data, and modulation, like LFOs and envelopes and noise and so on. We have 8 different slots, and we can save a set, load it, or clear it completely. There's an autosave mode, which you can set to a couple of different choices. And finally, we can send a set via SysX to a PC or Mac. And here it can be edited with a software called MC-202 hack. We have a few settings about inputs and outputs. So first of all, there's a MIDI menu we can set different kinds of MIDI input channels. So first of all, the MIDI input channel for synthesizer channel 1, 2, and the drum channel. But then there's also a keyboard channel, which is like playing the internal keyboard. We can define if the MC-202 reacts to MIDI velocity. And there are different methods to do that. We can use MIDI velocity to control the filter cutoff, the accent amount, attack, decay, sustain, release of the filter envelope, the same of the pulse width envelope, and there's also a note modifier and noise accent amount setting. So a lot to dive into. We can define if we want to be able to control the MC-202 via MIDI CC or not, and we can set the pitch bend amount. In the MIDI output menu, we can define MIDI output channels for the 3 synthesizer channels and also for the keyboard, so I can use this to play another instrument. We can define if we want to send the MIDI clock or not. And finally, what's the normal velocity and the accented velocity when sending MIDI. There are a couple of DIN-sync options which I won't go into right now. And we can define how the CV gate inputs here are used. Currently they're not used at all. We can use them like the keyboard here, just play it. We have a quantize mode, which quantizes the incoming voltage and sends it to the VCO. And there's also a direct mode, which does not quantize the incoming voltage, but sends the voltage directly to the VCO. If you have the high-res version of the MC-202, there's also a tuning menu. And here we can use different scales. Using a software called Scala or the Tubbutec microtune module, for example, we can send different scales to the MC-202 and use it here. Right now it's 12 tet, which is the normal 12 note per octave scale. And theoretically I could put up to 8 different scales in here, but right now I haven't uploaded any. This concludes the tutorial about the MC-202 mod. I didn't show all the features, there's a lot more, and there's actually a lot more coming. We're currently working on a recording mode. There will be swing and probability for each step, and probably more. I would also like to mention the overlay by Synth Graphics. You can actually use the MC-202 without the overlay. The labeling of the buttons is quite explanatory, but the overlay is a really nice touch.